At 6:04 in the evening on June 24th, the ground beneath northern Venezuela moved for the first time in decades. 40 seconds later, before anyone could fully process what had just happened, it moved again. Harder. Seismologists call this a doublet. Two earthquakes, a 7.2 followed almost instantly by a 7.5, firing back to back along the same stretch of fault. It is one of the rarest and most destructive patterns in earthquake science, and it just struck a country that hadn't experienced anything close to this magnitude in over 100 years. By the time the shaking stopped, sections of two cities had come down. The question now isn't just how this happened, it's whether the fault is finished. To understand why this earthquake mattered so much, you have to understand the fault running underneath it. Northern Venezuela sits on top of the Boconó-Morón-El Pilar fault system, a 1,300-kilometer chain of fractures where the Caribbean plate is sliding eastward past the South American plate at roughly 2 centimeters a year. That sounds slow. It isn't. Over millions of years, that motion has built and released enormous strain along this boundary, and it runs directly beneath some of the country's most densely populated regions, including the capital, Caracas. What makes this earthquake different is how quiet this particular segment had been. In the past century, the region within 250 kilometers of Wednesday's epicenter recorded only 7 earthquakes of magnitude 6 or larger. The most recent warning sign came less than a year earlier. A smaller doublet in September 2025, a 6.2 and a 6.3, that killed 1 person and injured more than 100. Scientists noted it. Few expected what was coming next would arrive this soon, or hit this hard. Wednesday was also a public holiday across Venezuela. That detail matters more than it might seem. It meant many residents were home, in apartment buildings, rather than scattered across workplaces and schools when the ground gave way. Keep that in mind. It becomes one of the most important factors in how this disaster unfolded. At 22:04 UTC, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake ruptured near the town of San Felipe, in Venezuela's Yaracuy state, at a depth of roughly 20 kilometers. 39 seconds later, barely enough time to register what had just happened, a second larger rupture tore loose nearby, near the town of Yaracuy. Magnitude 7.5. Shallower this time, around 10 kilometers deep. The U.S. Geological Survey immediately flagged both events with a red pager alert, its highest warning level, reserved for earthquakes where high casualties and widespread damage are considered likely. According to USGS analysis, this wasn't 2 separate, unrelated earthquakes. It was a single interacting rupture sequence. Strike-slip faulting across a combined zone roughly 150 kilometers long. In plain terms, the first quake didn't just happen near the second one, it very likely helped trigger it. This is the part most casual observers miss. A doublet isn't double the shaking, twice over. It's closer to 2 structural blows landing on the same target before it's had any chance to recover from the first. The damage spread fast. Across Caracas and the coastal state of La Guaira, officials reported roughly 250 buildings either collapsed or structurally compromised. In the city of Macuto, a large waterfront hotel was reduced to rubble. In Catia La Mar, entire rows of high-rises buckled. La Guaira was hit hardest of all and was declared a disaster zone within hours. Caracas's main airport shut down. Schools and non-essential activity were suspended nationwide. And the aftershocks haven't stopped. Officials recorded at least 20 in the hours following the main shock, some strong enough to bring already weakened structures the rest of the way down. Here's the part that's still unresolved. Rescue officials confirmed at least 188 people dead as of Thursday, a number that later reporting from Venezuela's health ministry placed closer to 235, with thousands more injured. More than 150 people remained missing. Over 200 were still trapped beneath the rubble. USGS's own statistical modeling, which estimates probable casualty ranges rather than predicting an exact outcome, flagged a real possibility that the final toll could climb dramatically higher as search teams reach areas they haven't gotten to yet. Nobody knows that number today. That's exactly what makes the next 48 hours the most critical window of the entire disaster. So why does a fault release two massive earthquakes almost back-to-back, instead of one? Imagine a long steel cable under enormous tension, anchored at multiple points. When one anchor point snaps, the sudden release doesn't just stop there. It sends a shockwave of stress racing down the cable to the next weak point. If that next point was already close to failing, it doesn't take much of a nudge to send it over the edge, too. That's essentially what happened along the Boconó-Morón-El Pilar system. The first rupture, the magnitude 7.2, didn't just shake the region, it transferred stress along the fault to an adjacent segment that was already loaded with decades of accumulated strain. 39 seconds was all it took for that segment to give way. Seismologists call this rupture interaction, and it's one of the reasons doublets are so much harder to forecast than single main shocks. The trigger isn't a slow buildup scientists can watch coming. It's a chain reaction that unfolds in less time than it takes to read this sentence. Behind every one of these numbers is a city that didn't get a warning. Caracas alone is home to roughly 3 million people. La Guaira's coastline, now a declared disaster zone, holds tens of thousands more, many in older, densely packed housing built long before modern seismic codes existed. Search and rescue teams from the United States, units out of Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles County, are now on the ground alongside a Mexican military rescue contingent. The U.S. has surged naval and air support into the region, including transport aircraft and an amphibious ship to move personnel and supplies. Residents have described scenes of total disorientation, buildings swaying, walls giving way, entire neighborhoods rushing into the streets in the dark, not knowing whether the shaking was over. The first 48 to 72 hours after a major earthquake are what rescue teams call the golden window, the period when survival odds for anyone trapped beneath rubble are highest. Right now, that window is the only thing standing between hundreds of missing people and a far higher official death toll. The shaking has stopped, but the fault hasn't gone quiet. Aftershocks are continuing, and seismologists are now watching closely to see whether this rupture has fully released the strain built up along this segment, or whether it's left a neighboring section even more primed to fail. That's the unresolved question hanging over Venezuela right now, and the answer may come from the ground itself sooner than anyone would like. If you want to understand the forces reshaping the world's most dangerous fault lines before the next headline breaks, subscribe to stay ahead of what's coming.